We have an outstanding founder of our UK industry as our speaker today, Dame Stephanie Shirley, a stalwart supporter of our company. So first a few words about Barney Gibbens. Barney was universally known, was one of the three co-founders of our livery company. He co-founded the IT services company, Computer Analysts and Programmers, commonly known as CAP, in 1962. And by the time of the founding of our livery, CAP was a resounding UK and international success, as well as a fierce competitor to many of our IT companies at the time, including one F International. Barney was our founding master and served in that position for 2 years. He was a larger-than-life character who lived life to the full and invigorated life in all those who he had the privilege of knowing him. He was an all-round sportsman with a competitive desire to win. He played not just tennis, but real tennis as well as golf. And I have had the pleasure of knowing Barney since the mid-1990s through the Egg Golf Society, where Barney was the honorary secretary for over 25 years. I spent many a happy sunlit day on top golf courses with Barney, with his endless stories and jokes, and occasionally some very good golf. I always felt the sun shone on our egg golf outings because of Barney's influence in all the right places. And so to our speaker today, Dame Stephanie, or Steve Shirley, who needs no introduction to the older members of our livery company. In July 1939, Dame Stephanie arrived in Britain at the age of 5 as a kinder transport child refugee. She started a career in IT and went on to found the all-woman software company that pioneered remote working and redefined the expectations and opportunities for working women at that time. The company was ultimately valued at almost $3 billion and made 70 of her staff millionaires. She was the first female president of the British Computer Society in 1989 and was our master when we gained livery status in 1992. Dame Stephanie will talk about the first 10 years or so of the growth of F International. So please welcome Dame Stephanie Shirley, CHDBE.
Master, ladies and gentlemen, it really is a privilege to give this memorial lecture in honor of the company's founding master, Barney Gibbens, and in the company of his widow, Tina. Starting our company 60 years ago, he and I were arch competitors, but we were united in our desire to see the worshipful company of technologists succeed. And I speak as one of the initial steering group chaired by Barney, which raised the first round of the company's funding, negotiated with the Corporation of London, and got our charitable trust going. Reviewing my company's place in the history of software, it's obvious that the older I get, the better I used to be. More perspicacious, more farsighted, more clever. Not so. I recognize the several people present who were part of the F International story and made it all happen. Together, our energy and persistence were responsible for the company's survival and success. And we occasionally got a bit of luck. Like Barney, I was a pioneer in the business of computer software, but my company was also a pioneer in the emancipation of women. Its original driving force was social rather than technical or commercial. Back in 1962, I was a woman in a world where women were paid less than men for the same work, patronized relentlessly, promoted only reluctantly, and deemed incapable of responsibility. And when my IT career hit the glass ceiling for the umpteenth time, it seemed an obvious move to set up my own company to get round those gender issues. I called it Freelance Programmers, later F International. It was one of the first high-tech companies in Britain, and it was designed as a company of women, a company for women. It eventually made me, along with many of the staff, a millionaire. We've just celebrated the company's start 60 years ago, but I'm going to concentrate on our first 10 years. To put things into perspective, note that when the company was taken over in 2007, by which time I was long retired, it employed 8,500 people. At the start of the 60s, it was still unusual for educated middle-class women to return to the workforce after having children. Back then, industry only accepted people on an all-or-nothing basis, and full-time work was hard to combine with childcare. Yet there existed a pool of women, mostly graduates, who were avid for interesting work, if only to say at dinner parties that they had a little part-time job. We set out to exploit that pool, or if you prefer, to cater for those women. Our company, Minute Number One, defined our employment policies as jobs for women with children. And this soon changed to careers for women with children. And as some of those who worked with us were caring for disabled partners and elderly parents, to careers for women with dependents. We advertised once in the Times, pointing out that the job was not for anti-feminists, but we generally recruited via notices in libraries and doctors' surgeries, by PR, and significantly by word of mouth. Our policy worked to our advantage. It meant we could pick and choose from amongst the women rather than competing for the men along with everybody else. My earliest recruitment strategy would now be called value-based. Some of our staff were family breadwinners. Some were disabled. It certainly seemed at one time that we were attracting people with personal difficulties, people with difficult children, that included me, people with sick and dying children, people with children who really didn't want them, people desperate to have children who couldn't. Separations, divorces, bereavements, the personnel problems were overwhelming. And later, I became aware that all decent companies spend a wodge of management effort on their human capital. To accommodate our female workforce, we developed a remarkably flexible approach. Firstly, everyone worked from home, long before it was fashionable. The Harvard Business Review called us the company without offices. It saved us money, but it also made it easier for our staff to combine work with childcare. Few of our home workers had proper work areas. Many did their programming at their kitchen table, though there were some early workstations, stylish teak secretaires that opened out to reveal papers, typewriter, and an Anglepoise lamp. In my own home office, our photocopier, a very early white on black one, was kept in the bathroom. We had a spirit duplicator and a shared telephone line, or party line as it was winsomely called. The focus on home working was near absolute. We wore identifying pins so as to recognize each other when meeting on clients' premises. Secondly, we didn't have conventional staff. Instead, we established a panel, a term borrowed from market research, a panel of freelancers. Women with children were loath to commit their availability on any fixed price basis, so many of our panel grew to be on the min-max contracts, where the freelancer was guaranteed a minimum amount of work, and the company could ask up to a maximum. If you worked with us, you could be full-time or part-time, you could be salaried or consultant, you could choose to work full-time at home in the winter, but switch to part-time working in an office in the summer. You could opt to take more holiday in return for less pay, or take more of your remuneration in the form of pension contributions. Our staff were delighted in the flexibility we gave them, and we delighted in the benefits of having a contented, well-motivated workforce. One consequence of our approach was that all our labor costs moved from fixed to variable, from payroll to purchase ledger. Keep fixed costs down was my motto, and good advice it remains. All this was unorthodox, and in the mid-1970s, both the Inland Revenue and the DHSS descended on us in a blizzard of red tape, challenging us for potentially cheating the taxman. And after 3 years of tiresome episodes, endless correspondence and interrogations, they finally admitted that we were doing nothing wrong. Our management style was flexible as well, and we were not above a little subterfuge. When no one replied to my business development letters, I started to sign them not with that double feminine Stephanie Shirley, but Steve Shirley, so that potential customers would respond. By the time they discovered that Steve was actually a woman, they were already half hooked. Launching the company was not straightforward. Women in those days were barred from certain activities, including most things to do with finance. So I was unable to open the company's bank account without my husband's authorization. I had a very understanding husband. Once when I said, "My husband's an angel," a woman complained. "You're lucky," she said. "Mine's still alive." We could not have started smaller. With £6, about £140 in today's money, on my dining room table. Venture capital as we know it today was hard to come by. Quite apart from all the other considerations, it was lack of capital that ruled out permanent staff. We only sought outside capital after we'd sized up and were respectably profitable. That £6 investment bought letter paper, so small, half foolscap, that with care I could hunt and peck a page without mistake. As a business joke, our letterhead was also without capital and entirely in lowercase. The original arrow, the freelance, came to be a line. The grey in our house style was chosen because it looked masculine. Later, it morphed to silver. Initially, the business was funded by my own labour and subsequently through a second mortgage on the family home, traditional ways of entrepreneurial funding. Then followed a less conventional method. For several years, our associates, as we learned to call the panel members, were normally paid only when the customers paid the company. It was an early form of the gig economy. By 1965, there were 3 staff working in our small home, plus me and the baby, a secretary 1 afternoon a week, and my babysitter on Tuesday afternoons. Somehow, I always managed to get my external appointments on Tuesday afternoons. To make us seem professional, I charged a guinea an hour, £1, 1 shilling, or 105p in modern money, because true professionals like solicitors charged in guineas. And we paid 15 shillings, 75p, to the freelancer. It was many years before our pricing anything like covered costs. But we countered people's dislike and distrust of part-time home workers by moving to fixed price programming. That was an important step to go to fixed price, forced the need to estimate tasks and measure work done. And once we went fixed price, well-defined tasks such as conversions proved very attractive. This later led on to maintenance work. Our first assignment was, surprise, surprise, from my previous employer. But the second, introduced by an ex-colleague, was much more strategic. The management consultants Erwick Orr were planning a computer consultancy in the UK and asked me to think up and define its standards and basic operational procedures before the first recruit started work. That was enormously valuable. We built on those initial standards and indeed were commissioned to upgrade them after a couple of years. Eventually, they were adopted by NATO. The next project came, I can't remember how, from the city. Selection Trust were a mining finance house who asked us to write some program evaluation and review techniques software. That was followed by a number of PERT projects, notably for Mars. I was targeting American companies at the time, since they were more open to the idea of using contractors. Mars stayed a popular customer for many years. They gave our staff goodie bags of their products. We discussed whether it was professional to accept them and decided it was okay. We undertook early logistics work on freight trucks for British Rail and also for Tate & Lyle. They gave us £6 tins of black treacle. Then there was the scheduling of buses in Wallasey. Pretty sophisticated stuff run on London University's Atlas supercomputer. Stock control for BICC, that was on Leo computers. Lots and lots of stock control. We took a long time to get going, but we were beginning to make progress when, in 1967, a project for Castrol came unstuck, and that was nearly the end of us. It proved to be a watershed. We were determined to structure the organization so that nothing similar could happen again. We set up project controls, procedures for this, a cost control on that. We set up audit teams, reports on this, regular statements on that. If there was a single suggested safeguard to ensure that we were never wrong-footed like that again, I guess that was the year we put it in. We worked on an early database assignment for the Department of Health and blew the whistle on a very senior civil servant who asked us for a bribe. And that put an end to our work in the health area for some time. But in other instances, our ethical stance helped. We were bidding with IBM to a major government department that asked us to switch to ICL. When we declined to do so, IBM was so impressed by our loyalty that they went out of their way to partner us on a number of projects. IBM, of course, was the industry leader. They helped us in two other ways as well, though unintentionally. Firstly, they did not allow part-time systems engineers. So several beautifully trained women, such as Anne Lyons, who's with us today, left IBM to come to us. And in 1972, they were the first to unbundle software. Up to then, the applications industry was competing with the free software provided by all the computer manufacturers. Industry practice at that time was to have two sets of reports, one for the customer, one internal. In my naivety, FI produced just one set, warts and all. That established relationships of exceptional trust that carried us through when things went wrong. The search for excellence through quality is a long, hard journey, to be sure, but it brings its own rewards. The standard of our work was so high that a client complained that I was exploiting my girls. Simplicity. Things other people would describe in technical gobbledygook, FI tried to make simple and comprehensible. And by talking the customer's language rather than our own, we assimilated their perspective on the project requirements. And this led us far earlier than Barney's cap company and other competitors to think in terms of business solutions rather than technical issues. Coding was done with pencil and paper, using templates for flowcharting. The coding sheets were posted off to a data center, which perhaps 24 hours later would have verified punch cards or paper tape ready for a computer run. Our staff might be present to examine the results and resubmit another test run later in the same day. Otherwise, the results were posted back. We insured ourselves against loss of postal services. Our delivery dates were based on an average of 2 turnarounds a week. These were the very early days when we solemnly discussed how to spell computer and if programming had 1 or 2 M's. Programming then embraced all the functions of consultancy, design, and coding. And as the term came to more and more to mean simply coding, our company name transmogrified in much the same way as Barney's company, Computer Analysts and Programmers, came to be known as CAP. What started out as freelance programmers became FPL, then F International, then FI Group, with various subsidiaries, including one called F2. No one told me it sounded rude. I'm often asked for our formula for success, and in a way, ignorance was bliss. Because I had no commercial training, no one had taught me what not to do in business, so I could go ahead and do it. And being small and an outsider helped us. As Admiral Rickover said about the first nuclear submarine, one of the most wonderful things that happened in our Nautilus program was that everyone knew it was going to fail. So they left us completely alone and we were able to do the job. But in general, I don't think we were clever in our commercial stance. To keep things simple, we managed everything on a cash basis. In the long run, that helped. In the short term, it was amateur and suboptimum. Our pricing started off wrong and stayed wrong year after year, decade after decade. It only got itself right in the mid-1980s. But it did, of course, get us market share. The slightest wobble would have taken us into loss. We therefore paid quite extraordinary attention to cost control. Everything was done at minimum cost. That usually meant zero cost because we did without. We bartered services. That led to quite good arrangements with key suppliers. Our freelancers were all part of the crusade and in general did not take advantage. Our fixed price policy had implications internally. It encouraged staff to find their own technical solutions and to reuse code. It also allowed less qualified or out-of-date people to get work by effectively sponsoring their own training. We became good at estimating by breaking down projects into units. We learned to call them work parcels. Work parcels, none of which were bigger than something we'd successfully done before. And cost control was later enhanced by regularly re-estimating the work remaining to be done, rather than merely taking away the number of days worked from our original estimate, kidding ourselves that that was what was left to do. Not only were we meticulous about estimating, but we then added some homespun risk assessment. And we did end of project, later end of phase, post-mortems. It was a learning organization. By such simple means, painstakingly applied, we achieved an enviable level of control and kept our customers well informed so that target state were negotiated forward. And I could genuinely say that we delivered to time and cost. Although we lacked financial skills, we had plenty of common sense. Our need to limit risks kept us away from danger areas. Our lack of capital put an emphasis on credit control that had us collecting from one big customer, literally just a couple of days before they went into administration. To limit our exposure further, we strove to ensure that income from any source did not exceed 10% of our turnover. Nonetheless, when the 1970s recession hit, we were managerially unprepared. It was then that I learned the art of the liquidator, to focus on essentials. We only just survived. And the impact of the recession was exacerbated by a breakaway group who set up in competition with us. They were soon defunct, I'm pleased to say. But then most new companies do fail. We didn't. F International was in the first wave of high-tech companies, but it was not the first. Barney's cap predated us by a few months. But we were the first teleworking organization, the first to use telecommunications to facilitate the distributed office. Or so I used to claim. It turns out I was wrong. Many years after our start, I was mortified to learn of a similarly structured organization, Computations Inc., founded in Massachusetts, USA, by Elsie Shutt. Her previous employer terminated her employment when she became pregnant, stipulation of Massachusetts law at that time. And Computations Inc. was founded 5 years before us. My talk has concentrated on F International's first 10 years. 13 years from startup in 1975, legislation designed to level the playing field for women had the ironic effect of making our pro-female employment practices illegal. But by then, we'd made our point. We were a fine example of what women in the workplace could achieve. We were a standing reproach to the prevailing discrimination. We were pioneers, and effective ones, of diversity. And we were pioneers of working from home. As many of us have learned over the past 2 years, working from home has both advantages and disadvantages. Managing programmers has been likened to herding cats at the best of times. So when we started, people laughed openly at the foolish concept of programmers, and not just programmers, but women programmers working from home. Yet we succeeded. I like to think it was we who had the last laugh. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dame Stephanie. It's a wonderful story which contains many lessons which are just as applicable today as they were all these years ago. So thank you for sharing all of that. One question I would like to ask you, you did mention that at one point you started doing fixed price programming, which, as I'm sure you know, has been the downfall of many IT services organizations over the years. And you had your close shave with Castrol. Have you any tips as to how you conquered fixed price programming? I understand breaking things down into work packages, but there's a lot more to it than that.
There is also a lot of straightforward slog. You know, what is this? Is it a language that we know? Is it an application that we know? Is it an application that somebody else knows about? And to work fixed price forces you, if you're not to take unreasonable risks, forces you to count what is the work that's done, to have measures of activity, to have standards that can be monitored, so that when things do start to drift off schedule, you can pick it up very quickly. It's a simple process. I don't think it's changed over the years. And we found that applying painstakingly that sort of discipline, we didn't, in fact, come unstuck. We had one project for Sheffield Regional Hospital Board that cost us 30% more than we billed. But that was a contractual model. We hadn't contracted safely enough on the changes that were going to be made to the system. And while they kept asking for changes, they didn't, in fact, make any balancing difference to the prices that we were able to charge. So that was a contractual model.
Simple question, what programming languages did your staff work with? We
started off in machine code. This was in 1962, with odd bits of intercode, or there was another name for intercode, very simple coding. We moved on to the high-level languages, as we called them. They probably are amazingly naive today. Fortran for the scientific work, COBOL for the commercial work. We worked with one company who gave us a lot of work, and they specialized in operational research, which for some reason had always finished up with Leo computers. There must have been some salesperson there involved that had driven this. So we did a lot of Leo work, and I've been involved in the celebration of Leo's stellar position in computer history. So you name it, we probably did it. I did some work in binary, but only a very little, because in 1962, when I started in FI, it was beginning to be automated.
Okay, thank you. Here's an interesting question, which I'm going to add to, because it's on a topic I was going to bring up. The question was, do you think you could have been more successful in the early days if your workforce was led by men? And I was going to ask a similar sort of question, which was, when men did get introduced to the business, was that a change for good or bad?
Well, of course, I'm going to say it's a change for the good, isn't it? We couldn't have Would it have been more successful in the early days? I don't think so, because one of the advantages we had was that we stood out. We were different. People remembered us. We used to make proposals. About 6 customers would look at about 6 proposals before giving the work. And of course, they always remembered us. We didn't have to be the last one that would, to present. What happened to management when the men, after 1975, started being recruited in good numbers? Well, a lot of things happened. Some of it was disastrous. We had people, men, joining the company basically because they wanted to be among a lot of women. And that's not a good motivator for a software house. We also had men who really were humanists and could work quite happily with women without problems. But there were also men who worked only with women as sex objects, and it caused nothing but problems until we found out. We learned in our recruitment to do, again, value recruitment, and try and weed out the early male employees who would last. I mean, I'm still in contact. I was in contact last week with somebody who worked with me in the 60s, and a man, and he's interesting. He still remembers the early days. So I think it was a sort of gradual move. The other thing was that we had this enormous friendship among people. We had, it's almost like family when it was 5 people, when it was 15 people, when it was 50 people. And when the men started coming in, it professionalized it a bit. But they really had to, we started then moving to sort of collegiate, instead of the sort of human incentives that we'd had before. It was much more collegiate, it was much more professional, and I think the men helped us at that level. They also helped us in being rather tougher commercially than we had ever been. We learned a lot from them. Somebody sort of said it was when we had a merge, was it a merger or a takeover? I think it was a takeover between F International and a major male company. It was like Cheltenham ladies merging with the Army Cadet Force or something. The cultures were different, and as we learnt to merge them, we got the best of both female and male cultures, and very good thing it was too.
Okay, question from Peter Bailey, which what do you think of the current wrangling over working from home or in the office? I mean, it's taken many years and a COVID pandemic to actually force some companies to get into the home working business.
Well, Peter Bailey, I laughed loudly because I've been extolling home working and its the value of it for 50 years now. Employers are still hooked on this idea of presenteeism. Is somebody who's not present actually really doing their damnedest for the company at this time? There's a lack of trust there. And we know that the more you trust people, the more trustworthy they become. But when you start something like home working, where does that trust, the initial trust, stem from? The measuring and monitoring of achievements, again, has to be numbers, not just I think I've done this or I think we've got to the end of this. It really has to be numerate. And I'm not quite sure where this sentence is going, but people are even today debating whether home working is really effective. Now, I would have thought there was ample evidence now that home working is effective. 100% home working may start to be the other side. You need that contact with other people. But for a hybrid working 2 or 3 days a week in the office or 2 or 3 days at home per week seems to me a very happy compromise. During the pandemic, women suffered more than men in that more of them lost pro rata, lost their jobs. More of them were furloughed, again, pro rata. Women also took the brunt of the homeschooling of the children. So it's not been a good period for women. And I hope that we're able to settle into a more equitable and friendly relationship.
Okay, thank you. Business insight is now seen as an essential element in any systems person's skill set. Did any of your early team have business experience?
We had quite early on, about 3 years in or something, we had a very strong manager from, she used to work with Commercial Union, who was well-trained and lovely woman. My husband was godfather to her son. And she brought in a lot of business experience. And I even offered her to change the company into a partnership with her, but she needed the salary, and so she stayed on salary. Later, she was the one that led the breakaway group. So I don't quite know whether the two go together or not. She had those business skills had to come from somewhere. After she left, I approached the local management center where I'd had some training like I joined something called a T group. I don't know if you know it. I'd had a bit of T group training. And I spoke to them and sort of said, I'd do a deal. They could have access to a new sort of company in the high-tech area that was quite different, service company, quite different from all the books and theories were about manufacturing companies, in return for access to some commercial expertise. And that worked very well. He was paid as a consultant for some time, but not paid. We did the deal as a consultant. He finished up on the board, and I think he was paid. Very good solution. But I mean, I was desperate, and you know, the financial side just scared me. For that reason, I didn't have a finance director for 25 years. And if any people ask me what would I do differently, I would have a finance director after about 5 years. I was scared of the money boys. I was scared of them spoiling it. And although I learned a little, you know, the basics of finance and how to read a balance sheet, but I never really got those skills in at the right time, and we survived.
Okay, thank you. If you have one concept or life perspective that you would love the world to know, what would it be?
I think it's about diversity, because my interest in women has morphed into an interest in diversity. There are so many there's so many people around who can help your organization. They may be old, they may be young, they may be black, they may be pink. We really have to learn to use all the skills that are available. And my late son was autistic, and I work in the autism field, and encourage companies, especially finance and insurance and like companies, banking, to use people with autism, because they bring in yet more skills. And I'm sure there are other instances of untapped potential that we need. We're so short of labor at the moment. Please, I hope the law changes so that we can get some more international staff in. But we really have to use everybody that's available. And they're there. They're there as women, they're there as men, and they're there in the whole variety of shapes and sizes.
Okay, thank you. Here's another interesting question. What is your major motivation that keeps you going through all situations? You've obviously had a lot to go through.
Yes, my early childhood has made a big difference to me. When I was about 6 or 7, well-meaning neighbors of my foster parents said, and I remember it as repeatedly to me, "Aren't you lucky to be saved? Aren't you lucky to be saved?" And indeed, I was lucky, but it left me with the need to justify my own existence and make sure that I lead a life that was worth saving. Not terribly healthy for a small child, but that's what happened. I get enormous pleasure from my philanthropy. I get enormous pleasure from the achievements that I had in business, small though they are compared to some of the monoliths, but they really are. It's been a full life, a wonderful life. I still want to do better tomorrow than I did yesterday, and I'm learning. I'm learning new skills. I could even use an iPad.
Wow. Well done, fantastic. Did you find going public good for FI Group, or was it a big distraction?
It was good, really. A lot of people made some money. It again tightened up all the thing. I was retired by then. It spoilt some of the family feeling, but we just had a 60th anniversary party and 88 people turned up 60 years later. You know, it's quite something. And that was of the early people. You wouldn't get that in a corporation. People come and go now. The sort of loyalty of tenure that we used to aim for. We gave watches after 10 years and had a club of people who'd been with us for 20 years. But that is not the norm now. People move after 2 or 3 years to get new experience, to broaden their experience and to get themselves up the career ladder. It's a very different world. And to a certain extent, I'm quite glad to be out of the business world.
Okay. How did you manage staff training in a home working environment? And did you ever take on graduates with no experience in the early days?
Well, you got 2 very different questions there. Let me write them down so I don't forget. Training, in those days, we had things called programming manuals. So we got the right programming manual to the person and paid them to study it and get going. Very, very simple stuff, isn't it? Later on, of course, we had training division that was responsible for training. But in the early days, it was, you learned on the job far more than you do today, I think. You really learned on the job. Did we ever take on graduate trainees? The answer is no. We always went for experienced people of all the variety of people with skills and availability that we not encouraged, but we accepted very happily. We insisted on, I think it was 3 years experience before joining us.
Okay, thank you. You mentioned F2. F International took over a lot of other companies like OSI, Druid, etc. Was that a successful strategy in your opinion, as it seemed to cause Zansa indigestion and lead to the Stereo takeover?
Well, they were very big chunks to swallow. I think we overpaid on one of them, but all in all, the industry was growing so fast that without acquisitions, we couldn't really survive if we went on growing organically, because we would just become smaller and smaller market share. So it was not a decision that I was involved with, but I'm sure it worked very well. And Hilary Cropper did marvels to get afloat on the company. When we read, what was it called? The prospectus, that's right. We wrote the prospectus in female terms. Normally, all financial literature is written in the masculine, with some tiny little footnote on page 93 saying that where the male is stated, this includes the female. And we did it the other way around. So our first prospectus that we did was expressed in terms of women, and with a little footnote saying that the men were included.
Wonderful.
We were quite aggressive in certain ways.
Indeed. As a pioneer and trailblazer, did you have a role model? And if so, who was he, she? Or she, he, should I say?
I don't think I did in that sense. The people that I look to are, again, it's just on values.
Okay.
Mother Teresa, Barack Obama. I had the privilege of working with Tommy Flowers, who designed the first computer, and he wasn't a role model because I was so junior and he was so senior, but I looked to him as that was the sort of manager that I aspired to be. So I suppose in a sense that he was a role model. Tommy Flowers of Colossus fame.
Okay, thank you. And possibly the last question, slightly different tack for this one. What do you think the livery movement as a whole needs to do to support diversity, equality and inclusion over and above that we're doing already?
I'm not active in the company really anymore. And I don't think I've got any considered opinions on that. I think some of the terminology can be changed. I think organizations can make the halls more friendly to women. You should see some of the female toilets that I've been to. Basic things that are just welcoming to women. And as women take senior positions in the city, they will want to enjoy the livery company because it is such a good thing for business. And the charitable side is quite feminine in its composition, but there are things that they can do. I mean, I still keep hearing about, the first woman this, the first woman that. They all need to put their skates on and do something about getting the women in en masse. Have a campaign to get the women in there. Perhaps the Lord Mayor might take that on.
Many aspects of your life, Dame Stephanie, are inspirational, and it was great to hear, the early days of F International, because most of us have been around the starting of IT services companies, and I think we've all gone through similar pain barriers that you did in your stories. So on behalf of everyone here on the call today and the Worshipful Company of Information Technologists in general, thank you very much indeed for a wonderful talk.